Hello everyone, it's Amanda. I am so happy to finally be doing this video. I got my friend Christina to be my model to draw on to show how I map and draw on eyebrows, so big thanks to her. So first I'm going to clean the brows with a little bit of alcohol. Just keep your eyes closed for a second because this might sting a little bit. There we go. Okay, going to place my sticky ruler. I like to find the center of the brows, not by the actual brows, but I go right in between the tear ducts here. You can mark that with a pencil if you want. I just kind of eyeball it. And when I place the ruler down, the center looks a little bit off, just in between her eyes, but I think it's just because there was a bit of a crease in the ruler, so it didn't lay quite as flat as I wanted it to. You don't want the measuring tape to be too close to their brows because then it'll get in the way when you're drawing. And the biggest thing I do is I hold my pencil straight up and down. I don't hold it like this. I don't hold it like this. Straight up and down against the skin. That's what gives me the crispest line possible. And I stretch the skin. You have to stretch the skin, otherwise you're not going to get a crisp, clear line. So I'm going to put the front of her brow kind of in line with the tear duct here, right at the A. And then her natural arch is right about here. A little bit further over. And then I want the front of the brow to the arch to be about 60% of the brow, and the arch to the tail of the brow to be about 40% of the brow. And that's kind of how I choose where my tail, or where her tail, is going to end. Keep in mind that those A, B, and C markings are not going to be the be-all, end-all of a brow on everyone. Some people have a narrower face, so that would be way too wide for them. They're more to make sure that we have equal measurements on both sides. Okay, and then I like to get my front started. So I kind of like to see where her natural hair is, and I don't want to make it too far below the brow bone here because then her brows would be way too low. Don't want to make it too high because I want to go with her natural hair as much as possible. So I'm just going to stretch here, and then I just put a little line and see if I like it. And I do. So I'm going to use this line right here to match it over on the other side. If you like using mapping string, this is a great point to use it to make sure that your fronts are level. And I always start with the bottom line first, because most of the shape of the brow comes from the bottom of the brow. And I'm not worrying too much about making my lines really crisp right now. I can always go back. I use my nail in a wet wipe and really precisely clean up those lines. Of course, stretching, you always want to stretch because you're going to get the flattest surface possible if you stretch the skin. If you don't have a long enough nail to do this, you can also get what are called fine point Q-tips and do the same thing, or you can just dip them in some water to clean it up. Just use them kind of on the side, and that'll give you a really crisp line as well. I'm just continuing. I use kind of little sketching motions. I also start out when I draw by using very light pressure on the skin because I don't want to create too dark of a line just yet. I can always go back and make it darker, but it's much easier to erase the lighter it is at first. I want to bring her tail up just a little bit more because I don't want the tail of her brow to fall below the front of her brow here. And even though when I am drawing the brow, I'm constantly stretching, you'll notice how I always let it go and stretch again and let it go. This is because I know how important it is to see the brow in a more relaxed state and evaluate your shape as you continue drawing. And it's okay to go a little bit outside of where their natural hair is because you don't always want to use all of the natural hair. I always say you want to take it into account, but don't let it dictate your entire shape. And then I'm going to decide what kind of thickness I want for her arch here and just mark it. And then I'm just going to connect these two lines here. And I use pretty light pressure when I draw. The more pressure you use, the bolder and thicker your line is going to be, the harder it's going to be to follow. Just going to clean up this line here. Another thing I always do is after I wipe the skin with the baby wipe, I always blot it dry with a tissue just because the pencil applies better over the skin when it's not damp. Then I want the front of the brow and the arch of the brow either to be the same thickness or for the front to be a little bit thicker. I never want the front of the brow to be thinner than the arch. Now I'm just going to go around my lines and clean them up a bit. Just to make sure that they're really nice and crisp. And then you don't have to do this, but something I like to do is give a little bit of an angle to the front of the brow right here, just at the top, so it's not too harsh and blocky when your client goes to look at their shape. I'm just going around the brow and making my lines a little bit bolder. I don't want to make them really thicker, I just want to make them more visible. And if they do get thicker, that's why I have my wipe. And I also use very small, short motions to clean up the brow as well. I don't try to do one motion across here because the skin is going to move and it's not going to erase what I want it to erase. Also, when you use a wipe to go around and clean up your shape, make sure that you're only using one layer at a time so you can be as precise as possible. And I always get different angles, different perspectives to see how it looks. I'm going to lower this line just a tiny bit, really just that much, and that'll make a big difference. Remember that this is your guide for the rest of the procedure, so it's okay to take a while to do your shape and make sure that it's nice and even and crisp and just how you want it to be, because if you don't have an even shape, you're not going to have an even result. I'm going to fast forward through this part right here just because I am making little minuscule adjustments that will make a difference in the end, but it doesn't make a huge difference in the overall shape. And I do choose to do one brow at a time as opposed to drawing a little bit here, a little bit there. It's just what works for me. You don't have to do it that way, but that's what I like to do. And this is a point where it would be very helpful, especially if you're just starting out, to use the string to kind of get your even points here in the front, in the arch, and the tail. I've never really done that, so I'm not going to do that, but it is a great tool, especially if you are wanting to make sure that your points are really, really even if you don't really have the eye for that yet. I'm just going to mark the thickness of the front, so it's right about there. And then I kind of like to see, based on where her brow bone is, which it's right about here, the orbital bone is right there. I kind of like to see where it sits on the brow bone, because if the tail is up here a little bit higher, I'm not going to put this tail way down here. And I can also kind of look at the distance between the edge of her eye and her brow right here, and see if it's too much or too little. I'm just going to mark the end of my tail there where I want that to be. And then I'm going to mark where the arch is in the bottom line. And I do find it to be very helpful to make markings and lines and kind of connect the dots when you're first starting out, because it's a little less intimidating, I think, that way. And that should be a little bit lower. And just notice how I'm stretching every single time I go to draw. I never draw with the skin just relaxed like this. I always, always, always stretch. I'm just connecting these lines here. Doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to get some color on there, and then I can go around and manipulate it how I want. Now I'm going to start from the tail. Because I'm right-handed, the left brow is a little bit trickier for me to draw, so I kind of draw it a little bit differently than I do the right one. So I'm coming up here, and I made that a little too thick. Just want to thin that out a little bit, and even that slight, tiny little millimeter or two difference will make a big difference when it comes to your end result. And I will often blot the skin with a tissue after I use the baby wipe on it, because the pencil does not transfer very well onto damp skin. I do apologize that for a lot of drawing on this left brow, my hand is in the way, but because I'm a righty, I come across to draw the left brow, and this is just the angle that I'm comfortable working at. So I'm just going to connect the arch to the front of the brow. A little bit of a rough line there, and then I can smooth it out. I'm just going around and making my lines a little bit bolder. Not thicker, just darker. Again, I'm just going to fast forward through this part here because I'm making little adjustments just to make sure that the brows are symmetrical. I kind of like to get what I call my base shape on, which is kind of a rough draft of my shape. And then I go around and kind of make little edits to it and make sure that it's exactly where I want it to be and exactly how dark I want it to be. I especially always make sure to stretch this bottom part of the brow a lot to really get in there because that part of the brow has a lot of movement. All right, at this point, I'm gonna take the sticky ruler off. I'm sorry if this pulls your hair a little bit. You okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm going to stand over here and just get a view here and see how they look. I'm going to turn this corner down a little bit. Ever so slightly. Okay, so she's laying down and they're looking pretty even, but it's also very important to sit your client up when you're working on them because you want to make sure that their face falls, because their face falls differently, you want to make sure that the shape still looks good when they're sitting up because obviously most of the time people are going to see them sitting up. So at this point, I give my client the mirror and I ask them to take a look, make sure that they like it.
Wow. That's a huge difference. But I do like it.
Nice and even. Some people will have a stronger muscle on one side of their face. So you might have someone who pulls up really high here and you might want to even that out a little bit. So that's why it's important to sit them up. Also, especially with mature women, their skin has a less elasticity, so it has more movement and it falls differently when they're laying down versus when they're sitting up and gravity takes effect. If you made it all the way through, thank you so much for watching. Every face is different, so every pair of brows will be different too. There is no cookie cutter shape that will work for everyone, and there's no magic wand when it comes to mastering mapping. It takes time and practice to get more comfortable with it. I hope this video helped you, and if you have any questions, feel free to post on the alumni Facebook page, and I'll do my best to answer them.